Lieutenant Commander Cole sat alone in the communications room of Anchor Point Station. The room was dark except for the glow of her screens. She had been here for 6 hours already, listening to alien transmissions and writing down everything she heard. It was boring work. Most people thought it was boring work, but did not mind because she was good at it. Anchor Point was a space station on the edge of human territory. It floated in the darkness between stars, serving as a meeting place for humans and aliens. The Empire had sent diplomats here 3 years ago to talk about peace and trade. Everyone said this was good news. Everyone said they wanted to be friends. Was not so sure. There were tall creatures with skin that looked like living crystal. They stood 8 feet high and moved like predators. Their culture was built on strength and dominance. They respected power and nothing else. When they looked at humans, they saw small and soft creatures who lived short lives. They saw weakness. Had learned their language in 2 years. She had studied their speech patterns, their customs, and their history. She knew more about them than anyone else on the station, but nobody asked for her opinion. She was just the quiet woman in the communications room. She was just doing clerical work. The door opened behind her and Lieutenant Park walked in. He was young and confident, and he always smiled like he knew something funny that nobody else understood. "Still listening to static?" he asked. "It is not static," said. "It is encoded military communication." Laughed. "Military communication. They are diplomats, Cole. They talk about trade agreements and cultural exchange. What military secrets could they possibly have?" Did not answer. She had learned a long time ago that arguing with people was a waste of time. He would believe what he wanted to believe. Most people did. "Captain Perry wants to see you," said. "Something about the reception tonight. They need a translator." Saved her work and stood up. She was short, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall. Next to she looked like a child. Next to she would look like an insect. But she walked out of the room with her head held high because size had never mattered to her. Captain Daniel Perry was a good man who tried hard to keep everyone happy. He ran Anchor Point with patience and fairness, but he also believed in following rules and not making trouble. When entered his office, he smiled warmly and gestured for her to sit. "The delegation is hosting a dinner tonight," he said. "Ambassador specifically requested that we attend. I need you there to translate." "Of course, sir," said. And Perry leaned forward with a serious expression. "Please try to be pleasant. I know you have concerns about but tonight is about building relationships. We cannot afford to offend them." Nodded. She had shared her concerns with Perry many times. She had told him about the strange patterns in communications. She had told him about the encrypted channels that did not match diplomatic protocols. He had listened politely and done nothing. He thought she was being paranoid. That night put on her dress uniform and walked into the diplomatic hall. The room was beautiful, filled with lights and decorations that mixed human and styles. Important people stood in small groups, talking and laughing. The diplomats towered over everyone, their crystal skin catching the light and throwing rainbows across the walls. Ambassador stood at the center of the room. He was the largest had ever seen, nearly 9 feet tall with shoulders as wide as a doorway. His skin was dark purple crystal, and his eyes glowed with soft white light. He was a warrior who had become a diplomat, and everyone knew he had killed many enemies in battle before coming to Anchor Point. Took her place near the human delegation and began translating. The conversation was simple at first, greetings and compliments, promises of friendship and cooperation, but as the evening went on, grew bolder. He began to make jokes that were not really jokes. "Human food is so small," he said, holding up a piece of bread between 2 massive fingers, "like the creatures who make it." The other laughed. The human smiled nervously. "Your buildings are small too," continued. "And your ships, and your lives. You live 80 years, 100. We live for 500. Your entire civilization is like a child taking its first steps. Translated every word without emotion. She had heard worse. She had read worse in the transmissions she monitored every day. They did not respect humans. They never had. They were just better at hiding it during official meetings. Later that night, after the dinner ended, returned to her communications room. She was tired, but she could not sleep. Something was bothering her. Something had said during a private conversation with his aides. She had not been supposed to hear it, but she had learned to listen even when she seemed distracted. He had called her something, a name. She had not recognized the word at first, but now she searched through her language database until she found it. Whisper mouse. In culture, a whisper mouse was a small animal that lived in the walls of houses. It was too tiny to hunt and too weak to fear. It existed only to be ignored. They used the term for creatures they considered beneath their notice. Sat back in her chair and stared at the screen. They had given all the important humans. Captain Perry was soft horn, which meant a prey animal that had already been defeated. Admiral back on Earth was old stone, which meant something that was crumbling with age. But Whisper Mouse was the worst. It meant she was nothing. It meant she was not even worth thinking about. Should have been angry. Maybe she was angry, somewhere deep inside. But mostly she felt something else. Something that had kept her alive through every challenge she had ever faced. She felt determined. If the thought she was too small to notice, then she would use that. She would listen to their conversations and read their messages and learn their secrets. She would become exactly what they called her, a mouse in the walls, hearing everything while remaining invisible. She began working faster, pulling up transmission logs from the past 3 months. The patterns were there if you knew how to look. They were planning something big, and they thought nobody was watching. They were wrong. The Whisper Mouse was watching, and she would not stop until she knew the truth. Spent the next 2 weeks doing 2 jobs. During the day, she worked her normal duties, translating documents and monitoring routine communications. At night, she hunted through encrypted transmissions, looking for the truth hidden beneath the polite words of diplomacy. The patterns became clearer with each passing day. They were not here to negotiate peace. They were here to study their enemy. Every diplomatic meeting was a chance to observe human behavior. Every cultural exchange was an opportunity to identify weaknesses. Every friendly conversation was reconnaissance for a war that had not yet begun. Documented everything. She built files and charts and timelines. She cross-referenced transmission frequencies with known military protocols. She compared the patterns she found with historical records of expansion. The similarities were terrifying. They had done this before. They had sent diplomats to the collective 50 years ago. They had smiled and talked about friendship while their scouts mapped every planet and counted every ship. And then, when they knew everything they needed to know, they had attacked without warning. The collective no longer existed. Brought her findings to Captain Perry on a Tuesday morning. She carried a data pad filled with evidence and a heart filled with fear. Not fear for herself, but fear for every human who had no idea what was coming. Perry listened patiently as she explained. He looked at her charts and read her analysis. And when she finished, he sighed and rubbed his eyes like a tired parent dealing with a difficult child. He said softly, "I understand you are concerned, but what you are describing is a massive conspiracy involving thousands of officials. Do you really think they could hide something like that?" "They hid it from those," said. "They were different. They were isolated and primitive compared to us. We have allies. We have intelligence networks. We would know if they were planning an invasion." "Would we?" asked. "Our intelligence networks rely on communication intercepts. I am showing you those intercepts, sir. I am showing you what they say." Perry shook his head. "You are showing me patterns that could mean anything. Maybe they are running military exercises. Maybe they are testing new encryption methods. You cannot start a diplomatic crisis based on guesses. And if I am right, if they attack while we do nothing, then we will respond accordingly. Perry stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I appreciate your dedication, but I need you to focus on your actual duties. Leave the strategic analysis to the people who are trained for it. Left his office feeling hollow. She had expected this response. She had prepared for it, but hearing the words still hurt. Perry was not a bad man. He simply could not imagine a world where they were lying. He had spent 3 years building relationships with them. He had shared meals and exchanged gifts and learned about their culture. He wanted to believe they were friends because the alternative was too terrible to accept. That night made a decision that could destroy her career. She sent a message to Commander Lisa Grant, a military intelligence officer stationed on Earth. Grant had a reputation for taking unconventional ideas seriously. She had helped expose a smuggling network 2 years ago based on nothing more than shipping schedule irregularities. If anyone would listen, it would be her. Grant responded within hours. She asked for everything had. She asked questions that showed she understood the importance of what was claiming. And then she asked to keep digging, to find something undeniable, something that would force the people in charge to take action. Dug deeper. She worked through the night every night, pushing herself past exhaustion. And finally, on a cold morning 3 days later, she found what she was looking for. They had a secondary encryption layer hidden within their diplomatic communications. It was clever, almost invisible. The messages looked normal on the surface, but buried inside them was a completely different conversation. A military conversation. Cracked the encryption using techniques she had developed herself. And when she read what was hidden inside, her blood turned to ice. The invasion was already planned. The fleet was gathering at a staging point 3 star systems away. They had assigned targets to every ship. They had calculated the minimum force needed to overwhelm human defenses at each colony. They had even prepared lists of humans to capture for interrogation. And they planned to attack in 72 hours. Printed everything. She made copies and backup copies and emergency backups hidden in places nobody would look. Then she walked to Captain Perry's office with shaking hands and a calm voice. He was not there. His aide told her he was attending a diplomatic function with Ambassador. He would not be available until tomorrow. Did not have until tomorrow. She went to the communications center and sat at her station. She stared at the screen, knowing what she had to do and knowing what it would cost. If she sent this information to Earth without authorization, she would be court-martialed. Her career would be over. She might spend years in prison. But if she waited, millions of people might die. The choice was not really a choice at all. Typed a message to Admiral at United Earth Defense Command. She attached every file, every analysis, every piece of evidence she had gathered. She wrote a summary explaining what she had found and what it meant. And then she pressed send. The transmission left Anchor Point at the speed of light, racing toward Earth with the truth that would either save humanity or destroy one woman's life. Sat back and waited. There was nothing more she could do. The mouse had whispered its warning. Now everything depended on whether someone would listen. Admiral was 63 years old and had seen more battles than most people had seen birthdays. He had fought in the First Contact War against the Raiders. He had commanded the defense of Mars during the refugee crisis. He had buried friends and made enemies, and learned that the universe was rarely kind to those who expected kindness. He had never trusted the. Once transmission arrived at Earth Defense Command, it was flagged as unauthorized and sent to the Security Division for review, but had standing orders to be of anything unusual from frontier stations. He read the summary at 3 in the morning while drinking cold coffee in his office. By 4 in the morning, he had read everything. By 5, he was on the phone with every fleet commander in human space. Did not care about diplomatic protocols or political consequences. He had seen the evidence. He recognized the patterns. And he knew that if Cole was right, humanity had less than 3 days to prepare for a war nobody expected. The mobilization began quietly. Ships that were supposed to be on patrol changed course toward the frontier. Reserve units received activation orders with no explanation. Defense platforms along the border powered up weapons that had been dormant for years. Everything was done without announcement, without alarm, without giving any reason to suspect that their plans had been discovered. On Anchor Point knew nothing of this. She sat in her quarters, waiting for the consequences of her decision to arrive. She did not wait long. The door chime sounded at noon. When she opened it, 2 military police officers stood in the corridor with serious faces and formal postures. "Lieutenant Commander Cole," one of them said, "you are under arrest for unauthorized transmission of classified materials. Please come with us." Did not resist. She did not argue or explain or beg for understanding. She simply nodded and walked between the officers toward the brig. Her career was over. She had known it would be. But somewhere in the darkness of space, her message was traveling toward Earth, and that was all that mattered. Captain Perry visited her an hour later. He stood outside her cell with disappointment written across his face like words on a page. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this without telling me, without giving me a chance to review the evidence properly?" "I did tell you," said. "You did not believe me. So you went over my head. You broke every regulation in the book. You may have started a war. Do you understand that? If they find out we intercepted their communications, they will see it as an act of aggression. They are going to attack us in less than 3 days, sir. They were always going to attack us. The only question was whether we would be ready." Perry shook his head. "You cannot know that. You are not a strategic analyst. You are not a diplomat. You are a communications officer who got scared by some encrypted messages." Looked at him with steady eyes. "Then I guess we will find out who was right very soon." Perry left without another word, sat in her cell and counted the hours. The diplomatic delegation requested a meeting that evening. Ambassador wanted to discuss trade agreements with Captain Perry. He seemed relaxed and confident, just as he always did. He made jokes about human customs and complained about the temperature of the station. He showed no sign that anything was wrong. But knew better. She knew that somewhere far away, warships were moving into position. She knew that in their battle plans, Anchor Point was marked as a priority target. The diplomats were here to keep the humans distracted until the killing began. The next morning, asked to see the prisoner. Perry hesitated but eventually agreed. It was unusual, but refusing might damage the diplomatic relationship he was so desperate to protect. Stood when entered the brig. The massive alien had to duck to fit through the doorway. His crystal skin glowed softly in the artificial light, and his white eyes fixed on her like a predator examining something too small to eat but interesting nonetheless. "The little whisper mouse," he said in his own language, knowing she would understand. "You have caused much trouble for such a tiny creature." Met his gaze without flinching. She had spent years studying his people. She knew their customs and their psychology. She knew that showing fear was the worst thing she could do. "I did my job," she said in perfect. "I listened, I learned, I acted." Tilted his head, surprised by her fluency. "Your leaders chain their own for speaking truth. This is why your species will fall. You punish strength and reward blindness." "We will see." Laughed, a deep rumbling sound like stones grinding together. "Yes, we will see very soon." He turned and walked away, still laughing, convinced that nothing could stop what was coming. 26 hours later, the invasion fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the human frontier. 100 warships emerged from the darkness, weapons charged and targeting systems active. They expected to find scattered patrols and unprepared colonies. They expected an easy victory. Instead, they found the human defense fleet waiting for them. Admiral had positioned 60 ships in a defensive formation that covered every approach vector. The colony defense platforms were fully operational. Fighter squadrons were already launched and in position. The humans knew exactly where they would appear and exactly when. The first battle of the war lasted 4 hours. The lost 37 ships. The humans lost 12. It was not a decisive victory, but it was enough to shatter the element of surprise that they had counted on. On Anchor Point, the news arrived like an earthquake. Captain Perry went pale when he heard. The delegation demanded to know how the humans had known. His confident smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and dangerous. And in her cell, Cole heard the distant sounds of alarms and shouting and understood that the war had begun. She had been right. The mouse had been right all along. Now humanity would fight, and they would learn what it meant to underestimate the small and the quiet. The war changed everything in ways nobody could have predicted. They had expected a quick conquest. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy who knew their plans before they executed them. Every ambush was countered. Every secret movement was anticipated. Every tactical advantage disappeared before it could be used. Was released from custody 2 days after the first battle. Admiral himself sent the order. He called her a hero and demanded that she be assigned to the newly formed Intelligence Division. Captain Perry apologized with words that sounded hollow and eyes that could not meet hers, accepted both the praise and the apology with the same quiet expression. She did not care about recognition. She cared about winning. Commander Lisa Grant arrived at Anchor Point on a fast transport ship. She was a tall woman with sharp features and gray hair cut short like a soldier. She shook his hand firmly and smiled like she had found something valuable. "You did good work," Grant said. "Better than good. You saved millions of lives." "The war is not over," replied. "No, it is just beginning, and that is why I need you." Grant explained the situation as they walked through the station's corridors. They were regrouping after their initial defeat. They had retreated to their own territory to rebuild and plan their next attack, but they had not given up. They would never give up. Their culture did not allow surrender. "We hurt them," Grant said, "but we did not break them. They will come again with more ships and better tactics. We need to stay ahead of them. We need to know what they are planning before they plan it." "You want me to keep doing what I was doing," said. "I want you to do it better, with resources, with support, with people who actually listen to you." Agreed. She did not need time to think about it. This was what she had trained for her entire life. This was why she had learned the language and studied their culture and spent countless hours listening to their conversations. She was born to be a mouse in the walls. Now she would become something more. Grant established a mobile intelligence vessel called the Quiet Star. It was a small ship, fast and hard to detect, equipped with the most advanced communication systems humanity had ever built. Led a team of 12 analysts who worked around the clock to intercept and decode transmissions. They became ghosts in the enemy network, seeing everything while remaining invisible. The months that followed were brutal. The launched attack after attack, each one larger and more desperate than the last. Human colonies burned. Ships were destroyed. People died by the thousands. But every time they prepared a major offensive and her team found it first. Every time they tried to surprise the human fleet, the surprise was waiting for them instead. The High Command grew obsessed with finding the source of the leak. They executed officers suspected of being traitors. They changed encryption protocols every week. They spread false information through their own channels to identify who was passing intelligence to the humans. Nothing worked. Broke every new code they created. She identified their deception operations within days. She learned to read the patterns of their thinking so well that she could predict what they would do before they decided to do it. The Quiet Star became the most valuable asset in the human military, and nobody outside the intelligence division even knew it existed. Ambassador was given a new assignment. The warrior who had become a diplomat was now a hunter. He was tasked with finding and destroying whatever was compromising communications. He gathered the best trackers and analysts in the Empire and began searching for the invisible enemy that was costing them the war. It took him 3 months to identify Anchor Point as the origin of the first leak. It took another month to narrow down the source to a single officer. When he finally understood who had been listening to every conversation, reading every message, learning every secret, he felt something he had not experienced in centuries. He felt afraid. The Whisper Mouse, the insignificant creature he had laughed at, the tiny human woman who had seemed too small to notice. She had been watching him from the beginning. She had heard every word he said and understood every implication. She had turned his own contempt into a weapon and used it to destroy his people's plans. Spread the warning through military channels. That had once been a joke became something else entirely. Whisper Mouse now meant danger. It meant an unseen enemy who could not be found or stopped. It meant that they had made a terrible mistake by underestimating the humans. Human propaganda picked up the story. News networks across Earth and the colonies told the tale of Cole, the overlooked communications officer who had saved humanity. Her picture appeared on recruitment posters. Her name was spoken with respect and gratitude. She became a symbol of everything that made humans different from not strength or size or power, but determination, intelligence, and the refusal to be ignored. Did not care about fame. She continued her work on the Quiet Star, listening and learning and passing information to the fleet commanders who needed it. She slept 4 hours a night and ate when someone reminded her to. She drove herself harder than anyone should be driven, because she knew the war was not over and would not stop until one side was completely destroyed. One evening, Grant found her alone in the communications room, staring at screens filled with intercepted transmissions. The commander sat down beside her and said nothing for a long moment. "They are hunting you," Grant finally said. "Specifically you, has been assigned to find and eliminate you personally." Nodded, she had read the transmissions, she knew. "Are you afraid?" Thought about the question carefully before answering. "No, I am not afraid of being hunted. I am afraid of what happens if I stop. If I stop listening, people die. If I stop working, we lose. That fear is bigger than anything can do to me." Grant smiled sadly. "You know he will find you eventually. He is too good to fail forever." "Then I will have to be ready when he does." Outside the ship, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere in that darkness, the fleet was preparing for another attack. And somewhere closer, a hunter was searching for a mouse who had become the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. The hunt was on, but the mouse had teeth of her own. Planned his attack for months. He studied human patrol routes and communication frequencies. He captured a merchant freighter and killed its crew. He loaded his best warriors onto the ship and programmed it to follow a path that would avoid every checkpoint and every scanner. He was patient because patience was how you killed something that could hear you coming. The Quiet Star was stationed near a small colony called New Eden. It was a temporary position, chosen for its access to a communication relay that carried military traffic. And her team had been there for 3 weeks, intercepting transmissions and building a picture of the enemy's next major offensive. She noticed the freighter on a Tuesday morning. It appeared on the edge of her sensors, following a route that made no sense for a merchant vessel. The ship was broadcasting human identification codes, but something about its communication signature felt wrong. It was too clean, too perfect, like someone had human protocols without understanding the small mistakes that real human operators always made. Trusted her instincts. She had learned to listen to the quiet voice in her head that noticed things others missed. She flagged the freighter for investigation and sent a warning to the colony defense force. But the warning came too late. Strike Team abandoned the freighter 2 hours before it reached the checkpoint. They used small transport pods designed to avoid detection, dropping through space like silent predators toward the quiet star. By the time realized what was happening, they were already boarding. Alarms screamed through the ship. Emergency lights painted the corridors red. Grabbed the weapon she kept under her console and ran toward the sound of fighting. She was not a soldier. She had never been trained for combat, but she was not going to hide while her people died. The warriors cut through the ship's defenders like fire through paper. They were bigger and stronger and bred for killing. Human Marines fell one after another, buying time with their lives so that others could escape. The battle moved through corridors slick with blood, leaving destruction in its wake. Commander Grant found near the communications center. The older woman was wounded, holding a pistol in one hand and pressing the other against a gash in her side. "You need to run," Grant said. "Get to the escape pods, get out of here." "I am not leaving." "That is not a suggestion, Lieutenant Commander. That is an order. You are too valuable to lose. The intelligence in your head is worth more than this ship and everyone on it." Wanted to argue. She wanted to stay and fight and die beside people who had become her family. But she knew Grant was right. If she was captured, if got inside her mind and learned what she knew, the entire war could be lost. She ran. The corridors were chaos. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Smoke filled the air from damaged systems. Moved as fast as she could, dodging through the destruction toward the emergency pods at the rear of the ship. She was almost there when a massive figure stepped out of the shadows in front of her. He was even larger than she remembered. His purple crystal skin was cracked and scorched from combat. His white eyes glowed with triumph as he looked down at the tiny human who had caused his empire so much pain. "Whisper Mouse," he said in his own language, "I have traveled very far to find you." Raised her weapon. It looked like a toy in her hands. They both knew it would not stop him. "You should have paid attention," she said, "when you had the chance." Laughed. "I am paying attention now. Your war ends here, little creature. Your intelligence dies with you. Everything you have built will crumble without your ears to guide it. You do not understand us at all." Did not fire her weapon. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pressed a button on a small device she had carried for 6 months. A device she had built for exactly this moment. The quiet star's communication array sent out a pulse that traveled through every frequency simultaneously. It was not a message. It was a virus, hidden in patterns of noise that looked random but carried instructions that would spread through every ship in the enemy fleet. Had been building it for half a year, hiding pieces of code inside the intelligence she passed to human commanders. Nobody knew about it except her. The virus did not destroy anything. It did something worse. It corrupted navigation data across the entire military network. Every ship that received the pulse found its star charts suddenly unreliable. Coordinates shifted by tiny amounts. Jump calculations became dangerous guesses. The fleet that had been preparing for a coordinated attack was suddenly lost in the darkness between stars. Felt his communication device buzz with emergency alerts. He heard distant explosions as ships jumped to wrong locations and crashed into each other, or into planets, or into the void. His face changed from triumph to horror as he understood what the Whisper Mouse had done. "You planned this," he whispered. "I told you," said. "You should have paid attention." Human reinforcements arrived before could kill her. Ships from New Eden responded to the distress call, flooding the quiet star with Marines who pushed the back. Was captured, wounded and raging, dragged away in chains while watched with quiet satisfaction. The war did not end that day. It took another 2 years of fighting before the Empire finally sued for peace. Their fleet never recovered from the navigation virus. Their coordination was shattered. Their commanders could not trust their own systems, and that doubt cost them battle after battle until they had nothing left to fight with. Was promoted again and again. She received medals and honors and titles she never wanted. She became a legend, the small woman who had defeated an empire by listening when no one else would. But the thing she valued most was not the recognition. It was the change she saw in culture after the war. The term whisper mouse became a proverb among their people. It meant the danger you ignore. It meant the enemy too small to see. Parents told their children stories about the human woman who had destroyed a fleet with nothing but patience and attention. Decades later, when was old and gray and finally retired, a young diplomat came to visit her. He bowed low, showing respect in the old way of his people, and asked her a question that had haunted his species for generations. How did you do it? How did one small human defeat the greatest empire in the galaxy? Smiled and looked out the window at the stars she had spent her life listening to. I paid attention, she said. That is all. I paid attention when no one else would, and I never stopped. The nodded slowly, understanding finally settling into his crystalline features. The whisper mouse had taught his people a lesson they would never forget. Some threats do not roar. Some threats do not announce themselves with strength and power. Some threats sit quietly in the shadows, listening and learning, waiting for the moment when patience becomes victory. The small and the overlooked can change the universe. You just have to pay attention.